all here with us. I'd like to start with a traditional kind of welcome or acknowledgement rather of country. We like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that we're all kind of on right now in our dispersed kind of world. For many of you, it will be the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So we acknowledge the traditional owners and acknowledge that they have been the custodians of the lands and the waterways of Australia for thousands of years, and that we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So just a few housekeeping things. Please mute yourself unless you're speaking, just so we don't have unnecessary interference. We are recording this session. It'll be posted online afterwards. So if you're interested to kind of follow up, there'll be a recording. I'd like to pay particular thanks to the Art History Department for organizing the event, but in particular to Chloe Ho, who's doing all of the behind the scenes work. This is initiative, this series of our graduate students, and Chloe has been a driving force in this event. And it was Chloe's suggestion that we invite our speaker today. So thank you, Chloe, for your wonderful work and in this and other events in this series. I'll briefly but warmly introduce our speaker today, Cheo Chai-Hiang. He is a distinguished artist, but also a teacher. The brief overview of his talk, I think, speaks to that. I want to leave as much time as possible for him. Chai is how many people know him and refer to him, but Chai and I met many years ago back in Sydney. These days he's based in Singapore, so it's wonderful for us to be reconnected again through Chloe and to the University of Melbourne. Chai has made a significant contribution to the creative arts in Australia and to arts education in Australia, in particular through his long kind of standing service at the University of Western Sydney in Sydney, when they had a really dynamic creative arts and art history department. He was there from 1984 to 2002. And his most recent position there was a senior lecturer and coordinator of creative strategies, a foundation or core course for a large cohort of fine art students working in fine art and the electronic arts. You'll see from Chai's presentation today that he has had a really distinguished training as an artist and as an educator. He's trained in the UK in the Royal College of Art, and he's had a prestigious kind of residency as a British scholar in the school in Rome, in Italy. He's had many artist residencies around the world, many one-person shows, many participatory projects that he's initiated. He's been visiting lecturer, his works are in collections around the world, and he's also been a kind of inspiring writer. So he's one of those rare people who somehow manages to combine art practice with kind of teaching and kind of pedagogical work and also writing. So Chai, it's really wonderful to welcome you to the University of Melbourne, this virtual space. And to invite you to present to us today. Chai will be speaking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time at the end for discussion, for questions. So I'll hand over to Chai and wonderful PowerPoint that he has prepared. Thank you, Chai.
Thank you. Is that my turn now?
Yeah, you're on. You got the floor.
Great. I didn't realize it's more nerve-wracking doing this way than on stage.
That's right.
Anyway, I would, without sort of much ado, I would go straight into. my career as a student, which was sort of 7 years altogether, always connected with printmaking. And in fact, I won the Rome Scholarship in printmaking. But I don't, my interest in printmaking included the observation of how a print is being made. What are plates? What are printing surfaces, and so on. So at the end, the process is visible, not just a finished product of an traditional print. And I try to speak as little so that the slide can flow. For instance, in this piece, that piece of tissue paper here was squeezed into the wooden frame and flattened it, then roll 2 different colors, one on the front, the other one on the back. So the amount of the 2 colors was that you see on the sheet of paper after being stretched is exactly the same amount of that. And of course, I also learned to make print in a traditional way, but not sort of exactly sticking to the traditional sort of printmaking process. For instance, I temper with with the plate and bend it physically. So in this case, you see, this is highlight is actually graphically manipulated, whereas the cut of the plate here, it's physically cut. So the physical and graphical, the 2 important elements in the work, actually was the reason why I went to Barcelona in my 2nd year at the Royal College of Art, and mainly to sort of look at how the urban environment affected Tapier's, Antonio Tapier's work. I didn't exactly get to see very many Tapier's work. Instead, I collected a whole group or groups of images. And what you see here are the scratches left from vehicle trying to turn into a very narrow street. And the street is so narrow that they even built something like that to stop the corner of the building being damaged. I came to Victoria, Hayfield, around 1978, and this is something that sort of inspired me for looking at a whole lot of other things. What you see here is a piece of wire used to hold the timber, that piece of wood up, which is a temporary solution or make-do solution, if you like. But what you also see when they started to paint the whole shed, they painted that piece of metal too. In other words, something temporary has become accepted as more permanent. So I went back to Italy and started to look more sort of attentively about what I would call the making-do solution. What you see here is very similar to the previous slides. A lot of wires used to hold the park bench in Villa Borghese together. And when they painted that, they painted the wire too. This is on the corner of the main street in Rome. and was supposed to stop dogs peeing on the corner of the building, but instead the dog pees here and got the metal sort of eroded. But they didn't have to repair it because the whole thing still stands. So that also talked a little bit about how the making do cares more about function rather than aesthetic. And this is very self-evident. One tends to use whatever one can get hold of at that particular moment, not exactly the appropriate material to do the repairing job. A second-hand bookstore just near the Vatican City. And this is a make-do remote switch, which would allow me to pull it from downstairs to turn the light off when I forgot to turn it off at the end of the night. A homemade paper spike and a poster for a show that I had in Rome. And this is where I spent 2 years living and working and showing my work. My first show in Australia is actually in Melbourne, in a gallery called Drummond Street. And my very first show in Sydney is Gallery A. And here you can see I use heavy metal nut and bolt to clamp the paper together, which is pretty inappropriate use of material. Similarly, here is the same. For some reason, I had a strong connection with Brisbane. I did a residency there. And later on, I spent a year, secondment, helping them to sort of phase in from the diploma to degree course. And in 84, I think, or 85, I started to become a full-time teacher. And having witnessed some of the full-time lecturers, because of teaching, their work suffer. And this drawing actually is a relief print as drawing, came from a drawing project that we designed because it's a young university. And I try to sort of bridge the gap between teaching and practice. So this is the early example of what happened there. Poaching suggests sort of appropriating. And dropping a continuous line, which is one of the drawing exercises. And in this case, I do it in my work. And then, gentlemen in suit and tie, a kind of similar participatory project that I did that sort of went to 4 different places. One of the things in my practice is I usually try to foreground learning in the work. And the gentleman suit and tie, the title actually came from a conversation I had with a friend who had to front up in court whenever he went to defend the graffiti artist. And normally he dressed very casually, but when he did that, he had to go in suit and tie. This project involves 2 musicians playing flutes for something like 10 to 15 seconds, very vigorously. And within that 10 to 15 seconds, in this case, 60 drawings were completed. So you see, this is after. And on the floor, there are 4 pieces. And this is what it kind of looks like. What I did was I used a chopstick to hand emboss every single piece of paper. So you see, before they put the charcoal on, you saw nothing, but after the drawing like this turned out. And the guy that I was showing with called Rex Irwin in Queen Street, Sydney, insisted I do one in his gallery, but it's so small, so I put a step ladder cut in half. It's there, but you can't see it. And then he traveled to Perth, the PICA, Perth Contemporary of Contemporary Arts. And at the end of it, we swept it away. The picture you see here is Lu Xun, a very, very important Chinese writer that influenced many people. And Lu Xun influenced me as a young man not to be too docile and tame. In other words, my sort of rebellious spirit started from there. So the 2 images that you see were anamorphic. In other words, they were painted on different planes. And only when you stand in front of this making do pooper scooper, which I use in my garden, still smells. Only when you stand near there, you see the complete picture of Lu Xun. Same as the other side. I like the sound when you wear the clock, cop, 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 cop. And that actually reminded me of a Chinese idiomatic expression called 格格不入, meaning that so out of place. And perhaps that it's another kind of self-portrait, if you like. Someone who had a very sort of Oriental cultural background landed in a Western cultural society. So sound becomes something that I use quite a bit. Like my friend Tex used a wobble board to make sound, and I was standing on the wobble board trying to balance myself. This is actually an exhibition initiated by our students off campus. And it happened when there was a corruption case in Queensland when developer tried to bribe the ministers with cash in a brown paper bag. So all shapes and sizes, very big and very small. I had an opportunity to spend 4 months in Hangzhou. And this is the show at the end of my residency, which very much sums up the way that I felt after having spent 4 months there. It's called The Dry Lotus Leaf, which comes from a line in a poem by a Tang Dynasty poet, Li Shangyin, that says something like, keeping dry lotus leaves so that I can listen to the sound of the rainfall or raindrops, which is kind of very melancholic, but that I could relate to at that moment. So you see these bowls, the water is joined from the very, very top one. Oh, I got a message from Chloe, was it? And when it goes to this kettle, which is boiling, the steam hits the underside of the glass, and then the picture of Lu Xun started to come out. Without the steam, you can't see anything. And what I did was using gum Arabic to paint the Lu Xun, which is an accidental discovery when I discovered that the envelope that I bought in China at that time was without any gum. The previous slide was poetry in the rice bowls. And this probably is a comment about the teaching in Hangzhou. Voltaire is, the plaster cast is something at that time, every second year students had to go through. Okay, now we come to Singapore. The old National Library has a showing space, which is where I had my first solo in 1975. And it was to be pulled down. This is a building that you can see from the new library, which is yet to be built. And this building is by Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei, called the Gateway. And my project, I was invited by a curator, probably the very first sort of properly qualified curator who studied in Curator, by the name of Constance Shears, to make a proposal. So my proposal included a happening of people carrying all those rubbles from the old library and dumped it in that bins, which was, I was told to be on something like 7th floor. And you can see it, the Gateway building by I.M. Pei is about 4.5 feet tall. You can walk into it. And of course, the curators and the advisory board thought it was a piece worth considering, but the library board rejected it. And that is why I held an exhibition about 5 minutes walk, 1 block away from the new library, that showcase things that have been rejected, and I want to revisit it, like the Lu Xun. Lu Xun, incidentally, is also a person that promoted woodcut, so that kind of printmaking connection is there. And you see that there's a neon light that sort of growing up to indicate he's smoking. It had been rejected and whitewashed and pulled down many times in Singapore. For some reason, they're so scared of him. That's at the old National Institute of Education, and it's gone. One of the couplets, Lu Xin was well quoted, is the 横眉冷对千夫指. I position my eyebrow horizontally and prepare to face 1,000 pointing fingers. So I have a making do spirit level to indicate he is indeed had sort of horizontal eyebrows. This was in an old LaSalle College, one of the two main colleges, art colleges in Singapore. And they, the staff and students helped me to do a Lu Xin pictures, which later on was whitewashed without warning. And this picture is actually a 2 days wake staged by students. For 2 nights, they stay there and they put on paper to redo the Lu Xin and drink and smoke. So I started to sort of unearth so many rejected or unrealized projects in the course of being rejected by the National Library Board. So I should thank them. Every rejection actually comes with new possibilities. Ho Ho Ying is a dear friend of mine, and this quote was actually written in a letter that sent to me, which I completely forgot about it. And he, after 30 years, he included that letter in one of the collections of essays in his book. I enlarged it 400 times. So you need to read. Reading is not a strong sort of habit among Singaporeans. I think Chloe will know. And I reused the 4 panels. This time it's called Rethinking 5x5 Singapore River. Now I included a 5x5 neon and a museum trolley. Can you read the text? Okay, let's move. Sis and I took my mom to my ancestors' temple in China, in Fujian Province, which is near city of Xiamen.
Hi, you have 10 minutes.
Sorry?
10 minutes.
Okay, thank you. There, I realized that my connection with the sea, and I made a proposed 5x5 there. Coming back to Singapore again, I did a long walk and trying to trace the beginning, the source of Singapore River, but discovered that it went under thick concrete slabs. The items that you see with neon were collected from the big item rubbish around Kashula Powerhouse. This is a mattress, another mattress, furniture that people threw away. And the letters in the neon are usually sort of a pair, like front, back, up, down, close, far, hollow, solid, which is very much the kind of elements that we confront with when making pictures or making, art. And I did the same when I went to Stuttgart in a place called the Felbach, which is supposed to be a small miniature sculpture. And I was apologetic when I saw the director, and he just said, rules are there to be broken. And I really appreciate that, instead of saying, oh, it's too big now. And I did the same in Florence, and people still use them as rubbish bin. And that project actually started in Singapore, which I took the disappearing street opera to the street. We did that in Sydney too. Then I did a project in Little India, a place where migrant workers congregated every weekend before, the pandemic. And not many locals join in or trying to get to know them. And this project was an attempt to create opportunity for mixing, for getting to know them, and provide them with art material to paint, to write, every weekend for 10 weeks, which is hard work. Very lowly funded, by the way. And some of our participants actually built a migrant worker statue in that field, and later on moved to the city facing face to face with Stamford Raffles. It's very inclusive. Anyone can come in and do things. These are students from NTU. And they come to get their mask done. And a week later, they come back to collect it, paint it. If you wanted to paint themselves, they can paint it too. We bought 4 tents, take it down in the morning, take it down after the event. So words has become sort of an important element in the way that I think about the world. Not just Chinese, but other words too. Other language, I mean. This piece is called xian, which is a limitation. And you can see an old shirt with a torn collar and damaged sleeve. Collar and sleeve in Chinese is 领袖, which means leaders. From the story of words to story of money. I had this show in Hong Kong. Later sort of traveled to Singapore. You could see this is a very familiar pawn shop sign. And what you see here, there's a little drawer that you can put it back or pull it up. When you have the other word, it becomes 上当, mean you are being tricked, you are being taken for a ride. And at the bottom, I have a 代, 当代, meaning contemporary. And I had 72 bags with stainless steel sign And you could see, instead of having the seashell component in Chinese word, I use a seashell, actual seashell, to replace the word bei, meaning seashell, which was a form of money in different parts of the world. And in this case, a knife to replace. Li is sharp or profit. Bo is to peel, and share is to shave. Don't sit on me is a graffiti I came across in an MRT, which is very rare in Singapore. I was supposed to have a show in Singapore, but because moving to Malacca, decided that Malacca is a more appropriate place to be. This 牌匾, the sign says 宝贝网络, means a network of pricks, which comes from a play by a very renowned playwright called Guo Baokun. Incidentally, he's also a graduate of NIDA, and he is the first director of the founding director of the first space, independent art space called Substation in Singapore. And maybe I could talk more about it later. The two components, one refers more to Guo Baokun's, the other one is an invitation I sent to many friends from all walks of life to submit a chair with 3 long legs and 2 shorter legs. 3 long, 2 short. And this is a result. Incidentally, three long, 2 short is a Chinese idiom. They say something like something bad is going to happen and will happen. Usually infer that death is there. Now the final group of slides called in a show, which I also used previous things. 50 Good Morning Towers. Good Morning Towers is an item that is very familiar with to many people in this part of the world. And some people saw the work actually told me that that's about a bar of soap and a Good Morning Tower is what you get when you political detainee, when you're sent to jail. 50 coincide with the 50th anniversary of Singapore. Here I made 5 clocks, 3 long and 2 shorts. Again, refers to the idiomatic expression of 三长两短. And clock making is one of the things which is disappearing. Same as the signboard making. And in Hong Kong, I realized they don't use tang for pawn shop, they use ya. And this is actually my name, and this is Jiao. Jiao is the year of war between China and Japan. This mahjong, if you play mahjong, you know that you have E1 means 10,000, and I commissioned a mahjong maker to turn it into 1 E, which means in the unexpected event that misfortune is going to come.
Chai, you're gonna have to finish up soon.
Sorry? Finish. Okay. I'm going to go to this. And I'd like to end the slides with a piece of work which had a line of Robert Frost. And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep, is a stencil sort of printed, stencil printing. Thank you. Finished? Okay, thank you. Shall I
Thank
get
you so
out?
much, Chai. No, well, if you like, unless we want to go back to any images, maybe kind of leave it up for the moment. Chai, that was really fantastic. I mean, what a wonderful privilege for all of us to visit what was really a retrospective, spanning your entire career. I now want to open the floor to questions, and hopefully we've got a number of minutes. So while people are gathering their thoughts, Chloe, do you want to? I'm sure you've got a million questions to ask Chai. Do you want to jump in first while other people are gathering their thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Chai. Yeah, I've been encountering your work all through looking at art and art history. So yeah, it's really, really good to kind of hear from you for once, and also just, looking at some, I think there's a lot of these images coming from your private collection. They are really, really illuminating. And yeah, thank you very much for showing and sharing that to all of us over here. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about that idea of printmaking you started with in the beginning, and how that might have influenced the Good Morning Towel work, or the Sanchang Liangduan with the clocks and all that. Yeah, because I mean, I'm thinking of language, but perhaps I'm going in the wrong direction with that.
I happened to bump across a book called The Story of Words, 文字的故事, by a Taiwanese writer called Tang No. And it's not exactly a sort of academic book telling you about the development of Chinese ideograms in the history, but a pretty witty and fun book to read. And that's when I first thought, yes, I should pay a bit attention about words. Also, you probably noticed that Celebrating Little Thoughts as a title actually keeps on sort of going. And it comes from the time when I actually, being sort of carrying the sort of Oriental cultural baggage and having to live among people with different culture. It's not an easy task. And very often I have to resort to a lot of those idiomatic expressions as a kind of surviving strategy, if you like. You have very dark thought about things, but you don't talk about it to people. You celebrate and enjoy it as a way of living in difficult times. And I think this is relevant to what we are encountering right now. And I'm really sort of fortunate that I have that cultural baggage because it actually helped me a lot to form my worldview, if you like, and develop into the way that I am able to sort of deal with things that is not easy. I don't know whether I've answered Chloe's.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you pretty much got it. Thank you very much.
So other questions, people could raise their hand using that icon, or you could type something into the chat function, whatever suits you best. Okay, Mark, please.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. This is fascinating, and it's really kind of, as someone who deals with art history, I'm a lecturer like Claire at the university, and someone who deals usually with kind of pre-modern stuff. It's always nice to hear artists actually speak instead of kind of living in the abstract. But one idea that you've been, it seems to have informed your whole career, which I find absolutely fascinating, is this notion you mentioned several times over, is making do. Or making do as kind of an ideology of doing it. And I mean, there's a lot to that, but the question I want to ask really focuses on is making do kind of, is it a conscious ideology, and in that sense, is there a limitation that you put on yourself? And let me explain why I'm asking this, is that it's oftentimes like the making do ideology in itself. It seems to me it's kind of it tests the levels of ingenuity in humans, in that you're making something that will do the job. It doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be anything, but it absolutely like will make your life better, or it's something utilitarian and pure in this way. And what these kind of the limitations of resources oftentimes create a greater kind of creativity to make things or discover tools that you wouldn't know before. And I'm curious if this is something that you've kind of, that has gone through your work as well, that you impose limitations on yourself to make these, to make some of your objects. I mean, for instance, the one that kind of comes to mind is the, I don't know the exact title, but the boiling water and getting the water down. That, I mean, you could do that a much easier way, but I mean, the limitations are what makes it interesting. Is that, I mean, I guess, does this carry on to other works?
I must tell you a story, Mark, about a conversation I had with a visitor to my exhibition in Rome. He said, "Oh, you must come to my village down south, an island off Sicily." And I said, "Can you give me an example?" And he said, if you visit a local hospital, some of the beds were actually held together with making do solution, with bandages to stop it falling apart. So I think it's very much also to do with needs rather than an ideology. I must sort of also declare that I was really poor student. Not unlike these days, people get scholarship to study and so on. We had to struggle a lot as students in overseas. I taught for 5 years in high school, saved enough for a single air ticket to London, and within a few months, the money is gone. In the printmaking department, we have tins of ink that people left over, and we use it to make our work. A lot of those strings that you see that I use actually were from a place in Sydney called the reverse garbage, which again, you know, they collect odds and ends from the factory, and sort of people can become a member or go there to buy and use it. So a lot of material that I use actually kind of very, very eco-friendly. It's recycled stuff, and rather than buying it from the art material shop. So it's it might be seen as a sort of philosophy, as a way to sort of talk about the idea of imperfection, if you like. But I think it started because of the need. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions from our other participants? Anyone got some burning question that they'd love to? It's a great opportunity to ask Chai directly. Anything you might have been thinking about? Chai, maybe we've got a little more time while people are thinking.
Sorry, Claire. Sorry, Claire. There's a question in the chat from Titana Yuhan. She asks, Chai, can you tell us a bit about your Guxiang hometown? How do you find connection to hometown while you're overseas? Claire, you've been muted.
Was it a question?
Yes.
Sorry, Chloe was
So,
just, Chloe, can you read out the question? You've got it, I don't.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your hometown? How do you find connection to hometown while you're overseas?
Okay, this is a very interesting question because I always thought that I carry very heavy cultural baggage. I have a longing for things Chinese until I went to China. You know, what I read in textbooks in Hangzhou, it's a beautiful city, quiet, poetic, where all the scholars, poets would like to stay and so on. But when I actually went there, it's so noisy. It's unbelievable, actually. It's the college wanted to give me a bicycle. I said, I have problem walking in the street. I wouldn't dare to ride a bicycle. So I think it's very interesting. You made me start to think that it's being a sojourner, you are marginalized wherever you go anyway. You are marginalized in a Western society. You're marginalized in your hometown, which is my grandfather's sort of migrated to. And when you go to China, you also thought, I don't quite fit in here either. So that poem that I quoted was actually used in a PowerPoint when I first arrived in Singapore. They have this question, burning questions, asking all the people, are you a stayer or are you a quitter? So instead of answering them, who am I ended up with that quote. I'm neither a stayer or quitter. I'm coming back to Australia, by the way, when this pandemic is over. Can't wait. Yeah. And that's why it's so good when Claire reconnected with me. It's another kind of opportunity for reconnecting with the people that I knew, I worked with, and the place that my studio, if you like, is still in Sydney.
Chai, that's a wonderful note for us to end on, I think. Really sadly, we're out of time. I wanted to thank you on behalf of the team behind the scenes for being so generous. It's been a really inspiring talk. We could talk on much longer, but anyway, now that we've reestablished a connection, I'm sure Chloe is going to be in touch with you, and we'd love to continue the conversation. But for everyone who's been listening, thanks so much for joining us. I think you'll all agree with me that this has been really a wonderful presentation. So thank you so much, Chai, for your generosity. And just a reminder that for everyone, we'll be posting this online, so you'll be able to revisit those amazing works of Chai's. And we might also post, if Chai's happy, his remarkable CV. I wasn't able to do justice to it in the brief introduction, but I think that will give people a real idea of the extent of Chai's sojourning. So we're delighted that you're coming back to Australia, and look forward to kind of reconnecting back on Australian soil. So thanks again, Chai, very generous. And thank you, Chloe, for making this all possible. This is an important initiative from our graduate kind of students. And I love the take-home message for me really in your work, Chai, was that idea of foregrounding learning in the work. I think that's a really fascinating concept, especially for us to think about here in the context of a university. And maybe that's something that we could talk about in a creative sense kind of next time in a follow-up conversation. But sadly, we're out of time. So thank you again very much. And we'll all be in touch. But thank you particularly to Chai and to Chloe.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.